Okay, hello everybody. I'm going to be doing a tier list of the pistols in Fallout New Vegas. This is my first video on the channel, kind of just trying to teach myself YouTube as a hobby. I figured I might as well talk about something that's interesting to me, talk about something that's hopefully interesting to at least one other person. So I'm going to talk about Fallout New Vegas, specifically the weapons of the game, specifically the pistols of the game. I have here before me the 18 pistols that are found in the game, including the DLCs, according to the wiki. Basically going to sort them. If you've seen a tier list before, like you know the drill essentially. So starting off, we have the first weapon here. This is the 357 Magnum Revolver, and this gun is, in my opinion, not very good. For one, I believe it is kind of outclassed by the Cowboy Repeater, which is not on the list because it is not a pistol, but it is also a gun that you get pretty early on in the game, that is pretty available in the game, and that has both higher damage and I believe lower spread, and possibly even better crit rate. I'm not sure on that than this weapon. So this weapon, just on the basis of that, is not going to be very high on the list. It's also um, there also exists a unique version of this weapon, which is the next weapon we're going to be talking about. Lucky, is not the greatest unique weapon, but it still is better than this weapon. And so because this weapon is competing because this weapon is competing not only against the Cowboy Repeater, which is better than it, but also Lucky, which is better than it, it's going to go into C tier. It's being saved from D tier. It does not belong in D tier, in my opinion, because, for one, it is available very early on into the game. It's available in Good Springs, actually. If you kill Joe Cobb, you can loot it off his corpse. And so, for that reason, it's a good weapon, because relative to the time that you acquire it, it's very useful. I know this weapon is also used in like speed runs. You can like fly across the map with it. I'm not taking that into account at all, but because of its availability, even though it's not the best weapon in the game, is going in C tier. Not the best, not the worst. Next weapon on the list is Lucky. Lucky is essentially just a better version of this gun in every way except one. The one way in which it is worse than this gun is its availability. It is available pretty early on in the game. It's available, I believe, in Prim in the Bison Steve. But the problem is behind a 75 difficulty lock, and nobody in their right mind would come to Prim at the beginning of the game with 75 in lockpick. So because of that, it is a weapon that cannot be rated, in my opinion, very highly. However, I think that this weapon is actually something of a sleeper because you could, theoretically, if you really wanted to, build your character, take like skilled and good natured, do the skill glitch, pick up a couple levels, put all your points into lockpick, come to Prim, pick this thing up, and then just use it. Like that's a good idea for a playthrough. You know what I mean? You could have fun doing that. You could be like a cowboy. This could be your signature gun or whatever. You could roleplay a little bit. And if you did that, if you were able to pick this weapon up the first time you went through Prim, it would actually be a pretty good gun relative to the other guns that you would have available at the time. I think that its damage is still slightly worse than the Cowboy Repeater, which is funny. This is still 357 Magnum, by the way, so same caliber as this thing, same caliber as the Cowboy Repeater, kind of competing for ammo with both of those if you choose to pick any of them up. But despite the fact that its damage is worse, its crit rate is much higher. Its crit rate, I believe, is times 2.5 your base critical chance, which is very good. Critical hits in this game are basically extremely overpowered. And so because of that, I think that it's actually a better weapon than the Cowboy Repeater. So if you did pick this up, which not everyone is going to do, because not everyone is going to have 75 lockpick at all, or even like think to pick this thing up when you have 75 lockpick. If you do pick it up, it is better than the Cowboy Repeater, and for that reason, oops, did not mean to do that again. We'll see if I can stop doing that. For that reason, it's going in B tier, higher than the 357 base revolver, lower than some other guns. It's okay. It would be fun to do a playthrough with. That's all I'm saying. Next weapon on the list is, I believe this is the 44 Magnum revolver. This thing is trash. Maybe it's not like terrible, but I don't see a reason why you would ever use this thing because it comes around pretty late in the game. Actually, I don't think I've seen one of these early in the game ever. It comes around, unfortunately, around the same time that the next weapon on the list comes around, which is the mysterious Magnum, the same caliber as this thing, 44 Magnum, outclasses it in every way essentially. This thing is available, I think, in some locations that are kind of near or around the strip. I think it's available in Freeside. I thought I saw on the wiki when I was preparing for this video that, Oris carries one. There's Cazador Ranch or whatever that thing is called. There's one. So that's kind of the general time that you'll be able to get one, is maybe on the way to the strip for the first time, just before the strip, maybe when you're exploring the areas outside of the strip after you've been to the strip. That's kind of when you're going to get your hands on this thing. That unfortunately is not soon enough, especially compared to the Mysterious Magnum, which you also get around that time. You can get this either by doing talent pool, by going to the strip, going to the tops, and then going back to the whatever his name is, the Lonesome Drifter, I think, and then picking it up, or you can just loot it from him. So the Mysterious Magnum is unfortunately available at the same time as this thing, essentially, and it's much better. For that reason, since this weapon is basically completely outclassed, I'm going to put it in D tier, and I'm going to put our next weapon, the Mysterious Magnum, into B tier, or A tier. We can put it in A tier, actually. This weapon, I think, it's not the best. It's kind of like Lucky in that way. A lot of these revolvers are similar. They're not the best, but the fact that you can get it essentially for free without going out of your way at all, just like on your normal course of gameplay up to the strip and back, the fact that you can just pick it up basically out of the blue at that time bumps it up maybe a tier for me. So even though it's not the best weapon, uh, it has some advantages. It has some things going for it. For one, you can pick it up early, and for two, it kind of uses a caliber. It kind of uses a type of ammunition that no other useful gun actually uses. So you can use this thing just to conserve ammo for your other guns that you actually want to use. And it's not like it's a terrible gun either. So because mostly because of the ease at which you can acquire this thing, but also partially because of the actual statistics of the gun, it goes in A tier for me. Next up, we have two guns, the 45 auto pistol and a light shining in darkness. And unfortunately, these are going to both go into the NA tier because I can't fairly rank them. To rank these, you would have to like think about how far out of your way you would have to go to Honest Hearts, complete the DLC, come back. That's like 10 or 15 hours already into a playthrough. Come back with this weapon and then proceed to do the normal gameplay. You could do that if you wanted to have fun with it, but that's not really something that you would do in normal gameplay, so it's just for that reason it's difficult to rate these weapons. If I was going to rate these weapons, I would say at least the Light Shining in Darkness is A tier or above, because this is a great weapon. But I'm not rating them, so I'm not going to bother. Next weapon on the list, 5.56mm pistol, the base form. This weapon, similarly to the 44 Magnum, gets completely outclassed in every way by the next weapon on the list. It's available, at the same time or even later than the next weapon. It's harder to get than the next weapon, similarly to the 44 Magnum. And so it goes right with its brother, the 44 Magnum, into the bottom of D tier. Next weapon, that gun. This is an amazing weapon, and everyone knows it. This is basically like one of everyone's favorite weapon, or one of them at least, and it's very good. It has a high crit rate. As I said, crits are overpowered. It has good damage. You get it basically for free. You get it in Novak, so you don't have to go out of your way at all. You can either buy it, it's very cheap, or you can just steal it if you're that type of person. It's not difficult to steal at all. I think it's just lying there in the shop. So this thing, or in the back room or in the closet or whatever, this thing, for when you get it, for how good it is, for how high its crit rate is, for the fact that it uses 5.56mm ammo, which is so common, it's the stuff that you feed in like your varmint rifle with. Sometimes you can even save the ammo that you would use on a varmint rifle. You can use like a 9mm pistol instead, just to save up ammo for this thing. It's amazing. This is a good gun. There's no doubt about it. So it goes into S tier. This is the first S tier weapon. There's one other S tier weapon. I think that this belongs in S tier. I don't think that anyone would put this lower than S tier. Maybe in the top of A tier, but to me, it's got to be S tier. Iconic weapon, great weapon. That gun is up there. The next weapon is the 9mm pistol, just the default 9mm pistol. Everyone uses this gun. I would have to say that this gun is A tier. Oops, third time I've done that. I would have to say that this gun is A tier. It's not the best gun. Its damage is kind of lacking. It gets outperformed even at the start of the game by like the 10mm pistol or the weathered 10mm pistol. But even though that's the case, even though it's not the greatest, for one, it's another one of those weapons that's kind of iconic to New Vegas. I really like the design of this weapon. I really like that you can put like a goofy little scope on it. I like all the mods that you can do to it. It feels like it's one of the couriers, canonic or like a canon weapon that they would use, kind of like the counterpart of Maria. It's just a proper gun for Fallout New Vegas. And beyond that, it's very useful too. It's useful in the early parts of the game against like human enemies. They go down pretty quick to anything, so the fact that this weapon's damage is not the highest doesn't really matter that much. You're conserving ammo anyway, so you use this. Maybe you have like 3 or 4 different guns in rotation. One of them is this thing. You have a 10 millimeter pistol. You have the varmint rifle. Maybe one other thing, and you just kind of switch through all those guns. So this weapon, I think, plays an important part in that rotation throughout the early game and maybe even through the early mid game. Eventually you dump it, but because it's available right from the very, very beginning of the game, and because it is useful at least for part of the game, it goes into A tier. Next weapon on the list, Maria. Even though Maria is a better version of the 9mm pistol in every way, and even though it's actually not that hard to acquire, I mean, you acquire it like early on in the main story, or relatively early on in the main story, even though that's all that is the case, you can't really put this higher than the 9mm pistol because this is just, I mean, if you just think about like people who actually use this, everyone will use this. Not everyone will use Maria. Like this is just so much more useful. I can't even put them on the same tier, so I have to put this one a tier below. I would put Maria in B tier. I think that this is a fun weapon to use. It's one of my favorite weapons. It's kind of a sleeper weapon. It looks pretty cool. I mean, it looks pretty like cheesy, but it also looks cool. It's a weapon that's appropriate for Benny. I like to dress up with his suit and this weapon and just go kill stuff. I like the weapon. It goes in B tier. It can't go much higher than that, though. Next up, we have another 2 weapons. And again, the first weapon, the non-unique weapon, gets completely outclassed by the second weapon. The first weapon is a 10mm pistol. This thing, unfortunately, even though it's a good weapon, even though it's a very effective weapon in the early game, it's like a better version, basically, of the 9mm pistol. So use the 9mm for, stuff that you're not scared of. Use this thing for stuff you are scared of. Even though that's true, it gets completely outclassed by the weathered 10mm pistol. It's actually funny that this thing is the weathered 10mm because if you look at this and you look at that, this looks far more weathered than this thing does, right? This doesn't look weathered at all. Like I don't know what they thought weathered meant, but this thing is the other weapon that goes into S tier for me, and it is actually, in my opinion, too overpowered. It's actually kind of so overpowered that it sucks the fun out of the game, and that sometimes I prefer not to use it because it does completely outclass the early game 10mm pistol. It is so much better than the 9mm, so much better than the varmint rifle or whatever other guns you're going to be using, that it kind of trivializes a lot of the early game, or at least a lot of the very early game gun selection, or like the gun. Some of the enjoyment of the game comes from, picking out your arsenal, choosing, yeah, I'm going to use this weapon and this weapon, and this weapon kind of detracts from that fun. So it's unfortunate that it's so high up, but it is high up. The weathered 10mm, you get it immediately after you head out of the house in Goodsprings. So availability, god tier. Availability cannot be disputed. Its ability, its usefulness cannot be disputed. So this is the only weapon that must be in S tier. There cannot be any debate about that at all, in my opinion. Next, we have the 12.7mm pistol and the Lil Devil. And this thing, despite the fact that, like most of the other weapons which have a unique variant, it does get outclassed a little bit by the Little Devil. In my opinion, and we'll get to this when we talk about the Little Devil as well, in my opinion, this one is easier to acquire than the Little Devil is, and for that reason, it goes in C tier. It kind of gets saved from D tier by the fact that it is, at least in a normal playthrough, unless you're going out of your way to get the Little Devil, you'll probably pick this thing up, or you'll probably have a chance to pick this thing up before you have a chance to pick this thing up. Now, the Little Devil is a good gun. It's a great gun, but unfortunately, it costs like 1,000,000,000 caps. You have to go buy it in Freeside for a lot of money. And money is not a problem in Fallout New Vegas. I mean, you can go gamble. You can get enough to afford this thing pretty easily. But the problem for me arises from the fact that there are things in this game that I would rather spend my money on, like implants, for instance, maybe other guns. There's a Implants are the big one. If you're picking up this gun and you're not like in the late game where you have so much money that it doesn't even matter at all, because as I said, money is easy to acquire. Gambling isn't the only way. You can like jury rig for stuff. You can just pick up weapons and sell them. Eventually, you'll have so much money that this is completely trivial. You'll have all the implants anyway. That in like the course of a normal playthrough, where you're not going until like the end game, post game, all the DLCs, all that blah blah blah, this thing, there is an opportunity cost to buying this thing, and that's maybe like 3 or 4 implants. And 3 or 4 implants is pretty good. Like I would rather have 3 or 4 implants and use a different gun than I would use this thing. So despite the fact that all that is true, it still goes in B tier because it is a good gun. I personally have one more gripe with it, which is that its spread is just atrocious. I think its spread is like 0.9, so it just shoots all over the place. That's not my favorite. I kind of like to be a little more precise. I like to play like sniper type gameplay, long range shots. So it's not my favorite for that reason, but there's no denying that it's a very good weapon, just in terms of actual effectiveness. It just costs too much. Next weapon is a hunting revolver. This thing also outclassed. I mean, maybe you see a pattern here. The non-unique variant always gets outclassed by the unique variant. This thing gets outclassed, but again, I think it belongs in C tier. This is kind of debatable, C tier or D tier. I think it goes in C tier. It's competing with not only the Ranger Sequoia, but it's also competing with some of the rifles. And compared to some of the rifles, it is just straight up worse. It has a higher spread. I think its spread is like 0.35 according to the wiki. Its damage is worse than some of the sniper rifles or whatever. So when you're comparing it to rifles, it's not that great. When you're comparing it to the Ranger Sequoia, it's not that great. But nevertheless, it's still pretty useful. Like, you could use this thing, and because the Ranger Sequoia is actually somewhat difficult to acquire, that's really the thing pushing this thing into C tier, because you could use it until you get a Ranger Sequoia or whatever. Like, it's not the worst in the world. Maybe kind of borderline C or D tier. It's not going any higher than that, but C tier is fair for it, I believe. Ranger Sequoia must be A tier. Must be A tier. Iconic weapon, maybe the most iconic weapon in the game. The big iron itself, the Ranger Sequoia. It's a great weapon. It's a weapon that you can use like basically until as long as you want. It doesn't ever expire. It doesn't ever get outclassed by anything. Availability for this weapon is not great. You either have to wait until level, I think like 14 until NCR people start dropping it, and then you have to fight the NCR anyway, which you're not always going to do. Probably it's pretty rare to do that actually. I don't think a lot of people do fight the NCR. Or you have to get it from Chief Hanlon. You can do that in a couple of ways. You can just kill him yourself. You can, let him kill himself and then loot it off his body. Or you can try to. I believe this works. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure that this works, but I believe that you can actually shoot it out of his hands and then yield to him and then pick it up off the ground. But for all three of those things, you kind of have to go out of your way to do it. The yield method is a little bit complicated. And so for availability, it's not quite S tier. Like the availability doesn't really hold it back that much because it is such a good gun, but A tier is fair for it. Next weapon, Police Revolver, goes into NA. I don't like this gun very much at all. Even in Dead Money, where your weapons are kind of restricted, where this is one of the only weapons that you have access to, I still don't use this thing. I prefer to use melee or unarmed or whatever in Dead Money. Um, I just don't think it's good. I use it for like shooting out the shooting out the radios in Dead Money or whatever. It's mediocre weapon. If I was gonna rate it, it would be in C or D tier, but I'm not gonna rate it. It goes in NA because nobody in their right mind would go and do Dead Money just to get this gun to use it in the normal game. And the final weapon on the list is actually another one of my favorite weapons. A weapon that I think a lot of people underrate. The Silence 22 pistol. This thing is going straight to A tier for me. And the reason for that is that it's very useful through a lot of the game. Well, that and it's very available through a lot of the game. First of all, it does not do that much damage. That's true. Its damage is kind of terrible, but it does do enough damage to sneak attack kill human enemies at the start of the game, which is incredibly useful. Like you can sneak kill Joe Kava with this, for instance. You can sneak kill some of the people in the Bison Steve or whatever. One of my favorite things to do is to pick up one of these and just go in like a silent killing spree through the Bryson Steve without anyone ever noticing. So that's really fun. This weapon, first of all, you get it at the very beginning of the game. It's so cheap. It's so cool. The cool factor of this weapon is off the charts in terms of coolness. This is S tier. You can bring it into the casinos. It's a holdout weapon. You can always count on it to deliver the sneak kill. So this thing, I would always keep one. I mean, you never know when you need to like sneakily kill someone. You know what I mean? There's some quests that this comes in handy for. Um, Sometimes you just want to kill someone. Sometimes you just want to kill like an NPC. You don't want to have to face the consequences for it, so you can just hide away in a corner and blast them with this thing and hope it kills them. This is an S tier or an A tier gun for me. I think it's great. I think it's underrated, and that's just how I feel about it. So that's the whole tier list pretty much. I haven't used all these weapons quite as much as I have used some of them, like this one for instance. So if you have any where you disagree with the placement, especially on some of the ones in the lower tiers that I haven't really used as much, tell me. I mean, I could be convinced to change my mind on some of these, especially. Beyond that, that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching the video.